Hi, I'm Xu Dong, a PhD student at the Max Planck Institute for Informatics and Zalan University. In this talk, I will present our work on diverse and relevant visual storytelling. This is joint work with Rashid and Bent from MPI Informatics, Khushbu and Ferha from Zalan University in Germany, and Assad from the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. Let's first define the visual storytelling task. Visual storytelling is the generation of a narrative given a sequence of images. Here is an example. Given these 5 images, the human can produce a diverse and readable story. However, this task is very challenging for machines. Most of the previous work used overly generic language. Here is an example. The model first generates underlying phrases, and then repeat them later where it's marked in red. For instance, the model generates a generic word everyone for the first image, but still produces it again for the second image. Humans usually prefer a more concrete noun phrase, like the soldiers. This phenomenon further leads to lack of diversity of phrases, which makes story less readable. We argue that this is because previous work used global image features that extracted with an ImageNet pre-trained convolutional neural network. Global image features combine all available information, like scene, objects, and events, without explicit representation. In this work, our primary goal is to generate semantically relevant and diverse stories. We fulfill our goal by making the following contributions. First, we make use of an explicit semantic representation of images, named scene graphs. Secondly, we propose to use a graph-to-sequence method to learn the scene graph embeddings in a self-supervised manner, which is inspired by human behaviors. Finally, to evaluate the quality of our generative stories, we propose automatic metrics of diversity and relevance, in addition to reference-based metrics to show that we generate more diverse and relevant stories. Here is our full pipeline. I will first go over the definition of the scene graphs and the scene graph augmentation we perform. After that, I will describe how we learn the scene graph embeddings. Lastly, I will talk about the attention-based story generation model that we proposed. Scene graphs are graph-based image semantic representations. In each graph, nodes are objects like man, table, and food, in this following example. Edges are relations between the objects, like the man near the table and the man near the food. While comparing the scene graphs and the stories, we notice that relations between objects are realized in the stories. For example, man near food is realized as the chef in the story. It is beneficial if we represent the scene graph structure explicitly in our model. To make use of the scene graphs of the images, we first generate the scene graphs from the image with a state-of-the-art scene graph generator. Because the scene graphs are not necessarily connected, we augment each scene graph by adding one global node and connect it to all other nodes. After we have the augmented graphs, we would like to learn continuous embeddings for them. We designed the learning method based on the following 2 inspirations. First, there is a large agreement between human attentive regions and the activation map of a VGG16 network, which means if a region has a higher object detector confidence, it is more likely to be fixated by human participants during image description. We can say that the object has higher object detector confidence is more visually salient. The second one is that human eye movement anticipates the order of dimension in event description experiment. To simulate this behavior, we use scene graph embeddings to predict the object sequences ordered by their object detector confidence, which can further predict the order of the objects in the story implicitly. Given a scene graph, we first linearized all the nodes and then rank the sequence of the nodes by their object detector confidence. Then we propose a graph-to-sequence learning model that encodes each augmented scene graph with graph convolutional network and input all the nodes to one global representation, and then decode the representation to predict the node sequence ordered by the visual saliency. We use the multiplicative relational graph convolutional network that we proposed, which is a variant of GCN that encodes both nodes and edge labels. For more details, please check the referred paper. We perform the pre-training on all the augmented scene graphs. This can be done without any image story pairs. After the pre-training, we keep the graph encoder and the projection layer, but discard the sequence decoder. Our last goal is to generate a story with image-wise features. To obtain these features from the scene graph embeddings, we need to merge node features into one global vector for each scene graph. We propose to use a dot product attention mechanism, which uses mean pool global features as the query and the node features as the key and the value. For each augmented scene graph, we first compute the dot product between the query and the key. Then we feed the output through the softmax function and normalize across all the nodes. After that, we perform an embedding-wise product between the normalized scores and the node features and sum them up to obtain the image-wise features. Lastly, we pass the image features into a two-layer recurrent neural network with gated recurrent unit to generate the story. We train the model on all pairs of augmented scene graphs and stories with cross-entropy loss. The graph encoder and the projection layer are initialized in the previous pre-training step. To show the effectiveness of our model, we conduct experiments on the visual storytelling dataset, which has 50,000 visual stories of 10,000 Flickr albums with 210,000 images. Each story is based on a 5-image sequence. To compare with previous work, we first evaluate our system with reference space metrics like blur, meteor, Roche-L, and Cider. However, the reference space metrics are limited because they cannot reflect diversity and relevance. As a result, we propose to compare the frequency versus rank distributions of phrases via tips coefficient. This metric can directly compare the distributions of different types of phrases in a fine-grained manner. Because novel phrases usually appear last in the generated text, this metric can reflect whether the generated stories are as diverse as human-written stories. We further design another automatic metric for relevance to check whether the novel phrases are actually in the image instead of hallucinated by the models. We match objects between the stories and the human-written image captions. We first show the results of reference space metrics. We also compare the number of parameters in the story generation model. The results indicate that our model obtains competitive results with fewer parameters comparing to previous work. Then we evaluate the diversity of the generated text. First, we parse the generated stories with a state-of-the-art constituency parser. We then plot the distribution for different constituent types. Lastly, we plot the tips coefficient for all generated stories that we can obtain from the models and the human-written stories. Because the human stories have the lowest tips coefficient across all constituent types, the coefficients of the models are the smaller the better. The results show that the distribution of the phrases in our generated stories is the closest to the humans. The only exception is the distribution of adjective phrases. We further evaluate relevance by matching the non-phrases between gold captions and generated stories. We match them by computing the distributional similarity between pairs of objects and set up a threshold to confirm a match. In this example, phrases with the same color are in the same group. The results indicate that non-phrases in our generated stories are the most relevant comparing to all previous baselines. Finally, we also show the qualitative results of our model comparing to one of the previous state-of-the-art, IRL. We found that the relations of objects in scene graphs enrich the diversity of the different phrases, including non-phrases, like the chef, prepositional phrases, like on the bed, and verbal phrases, like take a boat ride. You can find more examples in our paper. To summarize this talk, visual semantic representations, like scene graphs, are essential for visual storytelling. We can learn scene graphs embedding with a graph-to-sequence learning method inspired by human behaviors in image description. Scene graph embeddings help our model to generate more diverse and relevant stories. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, let's discuss in the QA session. Also, feel free to send me emails.